Who has not heard of Eddie Brock and his little symbiote friend, Venom? But did you know that Venom actually ended up binding with Eddie's ex Anne as well to give us the titular She-Venom? If Venom with Eddie as a host hits hard, we can assure you that Venom with Anne as a host hits harder. So today in our video, we will look into Anne's relationship with Eddie and how she ended up becoming the host for the symbiote, who has a thing for biting people's heads off. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Anne's enigmatic past before embracing the She-Venom legacy. Anne Wang's life was doomed to be the way it went when she chose Eddie. Fans of Venom know that ever since Eddie was a child, he had some problems. In the very first issue of Venom Dark Origin, we learn about Eddie's strange behavior. You see, ever since he was a child, he wanted to be noticed by people. He wanted to be loved, noticed and praised, and he was willing to do whatever it took to do that. This was because of his father. While Carl Brock, Eddie's father, never said out loud that he hated Eddie or blamed him for the death of his mother, Carl's behavior towards Eddie did not help that case at all. Carl was extremely emotionally absent and emotionally negligent towards Eddie, which made Eddie think if he told his father about all the good things that he did, he would get attention from his father. Eddie stole the neighbor's cat, and when he found the owners looking for the cat, he brought it out of his basement, getting compliments from the owners. This behavior is something that he carried on into his adult life. In his high school years, he was seen stealing the pom-poms of his crush and pretending to have found them somewhere while pretending to have made the wrestling team of the school, even though he never did. Eddie was nothing more than the equipment manager, and he had the jacket because he was supposed to wash it off. This type of behavior, along with his obsession of making the truth, was something that pushed him to chase a lucrative career in journalism. When he came to the Empire State University, that is where he ran into Anne in front of a telephone. He had forcibly taken the phone from a guy's hand, which led to the guy and Eddie almost getting into a fight over the quarter that was used up. Anne was the one who tried to dispel the situation. Eddie asked Anne for help with the place he was looking for, and Anne decided to help the poor guy. Basically, Eddie told Anne that he was living off campus and he was unable to find his living space. But then Anne found herself in a really bad neighborhood. She was not even sure if Eddie could even live so far north. Turns out, Eddie had lied. Eddie wanted to spend time with Anne and cooked up this whole story about living off campus. He wanted to take her back to his dorm, and understandably, Anne thought he was crazy for doing this. She was just about to get into an argument with him, and understandably so, when a bunch of thugs showed up out of nowhere. As the area was indeed a bad neighborhood, and Anne was not wrong about it, a bunch of hooligans decided to target the young couple. The thugs pushed Anne away, and she hit her head on the fire hydrant, passing out. Eddie, being the coward that he was, told the thugs to take her and let him go, but the thugs were going to attack Eddie as well. However, before they could do so, Spider-Man swooped in on his web and made sure to beat those thugs up in record time. Once his work was done, he told Eddie to call the cops for him before swinging away. As Eddie was starting to come to terms with all the things that happened, Anne regained her consciousness. She woke up and saw all the thugs knocked out, and understandably, she assumed Eddie had done it all. She asked him how he did it, and even though Eddie had the choice to tell her the truth, he never did. He said that it was easy, and in Anne's eyes, Eddie was this rugged guy with boyish charms who won her heart. She often thought that Eddie never showed the side of himself to his father because Carl was very strict and did not like the side of Eddie. But Anne did not know that to a degree. The guy she fell in love with and the guy that Eddie truly was were not the same. The love between this law student and her journalism student boyfriend went rather well. Once his degree was done and he got a job in the Daily Bugle, Eddie and Anne got married. The lies Eddie told were small in the grander scheme of things, but they never ended. He told Anne that he was a reporter and an article he wrote was on page 3, when in reality, at the Daily Bugle, Eddie was doing grunt work, like filling up the coffee and sorting through letters. But he never told Anne that honestly. And when Anne could not find the article of his on page 3, the way Eddie behaved made Anne feel like she was the one at fault for ever mentioning that she could not find the non-existent report on page 3. Fast forward a few days, and Eddie ended up intercepting the letter from Sin Eater, a serial killer who was terrorizing the streets of New York City. Eddie planned on being the voice of this serial killer and telling his story while keeping the serial killer's identity a secret. During the interviews, the serial killer gave him front-page material and job security, and certainly Anne was proud of him. Carl knew that Eddie was lying. Carl was not happy with Eddie for hiding the identity of a murderer just for the sake of the story, and if Anne knew about it, she would have been just as upset. With his father's words and the pressure from the senior journalist of Daily Bugle, Eddie caved in and exposed the killer's identity. However, soon enough, Spider-Man caught the actual Sin Eater killer, and the one that Eddie had been interviewing for so long was proved to be the delusional neighbor of the actual killer. Owing to this mistake, Eddie lost his job. Eddie could have taken his loss of job on his chin, but he did not. Instead, he started going on and on about how it was Spider-Man who had ruined his life, their life, which scared Anne. Eddie only lifted weights throughout the day, and Anne was left to fend everything off in this failing relationship on her own, which is not something anyone should have to go for. Anne asked Eddie for a divorce. By this time, Eddie had joined Venom, and in a fantastic mood, he showed up to their meeting, signing the papers without any qualms. Anne was a little surprised by it, but she was glad that Eddie was seemingly doing better, because now he had a second job and was no longer lifting weights throughout the day. She thought that he would be over the whole Spider-Man blame game, but he was not. She learned how far that obsession went when Spider-Man showed up at her workplace because he had no idea how to get his parents out of Venom's clutches. Knowing that he was doing something so terrible broke Anne's heart. She decided to show up at the warehouse where they had been held captive. She was the one who spoke with Venom and Eddie and made both of them realize that if they let go of Spider-Man, he would be able to save more innocent people. This moment happened when, in the midst of a fight, Anne was almost crushed by a rig, and while Eddie and Venom were trying to hold it away and save her, it was not enough. That was when Spider-Man decided to help Eddie, and together they saved Anne. This opened Eddie's eyes, along with her words, which helped Venom change his path. With such a messy backstory with Venom, even though Anne was scared of the symbiote and how it changed the boy that she loved so much, she was going to have a lot of run-ins with it, whether she liked it or not, even turning into She-Venom at one point. So let us look into that. Anne's terrifying transformation into She-Venom. Now, as we mentioned lightly, Anne was a law student, so eventually she was going to get her big girl lawyer job, and she did. She was hired to represent Fordham Rhodes. Now, Fordham Rhodes was the ex-head of Extreme Violence, this game development company that was mentioned in the video game Spider-Man and Venom, Maximum Carnage, where Carnage went on a huge killing spree. Now, Fordham Rhodes was being represented by Anne, so they were spending quite a bit of time together owing to their work. While she was working with him, the third Sin Eater decided to attack Rhodes. Rhodes was killed off, and while the Sin Eater did take a shot at Anne, she was able to block it with her briefcase. However, the briefcase did not block all of the buckshot, and she was hurt. She was hospitalized and she went through surgery. While she was recovering, the killer showed up at the hospital trying to finish the unfinished job. However, that is when Venom showed up. Venom took Anne to this secret lair of his, an old bomb shelter, and once there, Venom realized that Anne was bleeding internally and she might not be able to make it. Eddie told Anne that the symbiote could heal her if she would let it bind to her, but Anne did not want that. In her eyes, the Venom symbiote was the reason why Eddie turned into this monstrous version of himself. But instead of listening to what Anne had to say, the symbiote started covering her, and Anne accepted it even though she did not consent to it. While the symbiote covered her while bonded to Eddie, it was insufficient. Her vital signs were going down, and so the symbiote separated from him and bonded with her completely. But her vitals went down, and she was effectively passed out. Now, while all of this was happening, a few thugs showed up in the bomb shelter. Eddie, who was no longer bonded to the symbiote, tried to drive these people away, but he was unsuccessful and was about to be killed off when Anne woke up. She threatened to eat them up as the She-Venom in her awakened, but the thugs were not bothered by it. They were rather insistent that they wanted to rape her, and that led to Anne giving into the bloodlust that the symbiote had. She brutally killed all of the thugs, even though Eddie tried in vain to stop her. Finally, when Eddie got the symbiote to bond with him again, Anne came to her senses and she was horrified by everything she had done. She blamed the symbiote for the disaster, and she felt like her internal thought about making Eddie a monster was true. However, when Eddie tried to take the side of the symbiote by saying that the symbiote could not make people do things that they don't want to do themselves, it did not calm Anne down. Instead, it traumatized Anne more because now she started wondering if she was the one who wanted to be this brutal. She wanted to get away from Eddie and Venom and ran away, but it was not going to be that easy. She-Venom to the rescue. When Anne got home, she found an unwanted guest in her apartment, the vengeful mother of a girl named Kristen. Kristen's boyfriend ended up crippled after a fight with Venom, and her mother decided to use Anne to hurt Venom. Eddie showed up, and while they were fighting with the crazy old lady, he was incapacitated. That led to the symbiote leaving his body and binding with Anne instead. She-Venom was back, and she was angrier than ever. She almost devoured the insane mother, and when Eddie tried to stop her, She-Venom tried to throw him out. As if all of this was not enough, the Sin Eater showed up. His arrival led to Eddie being sandwiched between Sin Eater, Kristen's mother, and She-Venom in the fight. At the end of this fight, Sin Eater was wounded fatally, and the symbiote went back to Eddie to make sure he did not get shot. At this point, Kristen showed up to stop her mother, and when the Sin Eater activated his vest, Kristen tackled him out of the window, and Venom saved her while Anne dealt with Kristen's mother. She-Venom and the catharsis of Anne's relationship with Eddie. In the symbiote invasion arc, Anne was taken into custody by the police for helping her criminal ex-husband. When she called Eddie, he assumed that she was in a really bad situation and sent the symbiote to save her through the phone lines. The symbiote reached her, and while Anne turned partially into She-Venom, things got significantly worse after this. When the police found out that the symbiote could be transmitted via the phone lines, their treatment of Anne got worse. The strain proved to be too much, and Eddie called the strain back. However, thanks to the partial bonding, Anne's mind mixed with Eddie's mind, she knew how much Eddie loved her. Even then, she did not want to go back with him. In fact, when the second Spider-Man, Benjamin Riley, one of the copies Jackal had made of Spider-Man, showed up, Anne tried her best to stop the fight between the hero and Venom. She ended up in police custody again, and this time, when Eddie sent the strain via telephone lines, she turned into She-Venom. As She-Venom, she decided to go to the amusement park where Eddie had kidnapped the parents of Spider-Man, and when she showed up there, she saw the group of gangsters under the control of a guy named LD-50. She wanted to eat LD-50, but she was stopped by Spider-Man. Eddie showed up because he was the one who wanted to meet with her there, and he was set ablaze by one of the gang members of LD-50. To save him, Anne asked the symbiote to bind with him. LD-50 took Anne hostage, and Anne asked Eddie not to give in to the bloodlust of Venom. Police showed up and rescued her, and Anne told Eddie that they were done. She felt like the man she loved was corrupted into a monster, and this monster was now waiting to corrupt her. With that, we see the relationship effectively fall apart. Bringing She-Venom to life, the cinematic tale of Anne's monstrous transformation. When Sony brought out the Venom movie, not only did it give all the fans the film version of the villain turned anti-hero, but we also get to see She-Venom. Anne Wang is played by Michelle Williams in the movie, and here she is Eddie's fiancée, who broke up with him after he read through one of her confidential emails and decided to confront Life Foundation's head, Carlton Drake. When she later learned about the symbiote, 6 months after their breakup, and despite having moved on to Dr. Dan Lewis, she decided to help Eddie as much as she could. When she was at the hospital, she was approached by this puppy. Looking deep into its eyes, she realized that the puppy had been taken over by Venom, who was actually looking for her. Turns out, Eddie was about to be shot, so Anne decided to become She-Venom and save Eddie herself. She sneakily took out 2 of the shooters by using Venom's webbing. However, when it came to the last shooter, she ate his head and threw him aside. She-Venom grabbed Eddie and kissed him, transferring the Venom symbiote into Eddie, turning herself back into Anne. Even though She-Venom came on screen for a really short period of time, the fans were rather happy to see the female version of this anti-hero. And we won't lie, a live-action She-Venom movie would be quite the interesting story to follow, even if it is a bit heartbreaking. flooring She-Venom's formidable powers and abilities. As She-Venom, Anne Wing ends up with the symbiote physiology. This allows her to have super strength, durability, regeneration, and accelerated healing, to name a few. She's also able to create her own webbing by means of constituent matter manipulation, and just by touching anyone, the symbiote is able to gather memory, which She-Venom has used. Also, we cannot forget, thanks to the symbiote, She-Venom ended up being able to know about Eddie's thoughts, which would fall under the path of telepathic powers, other than the telepathy that the symbiote generally uses to speak with its host. Marvelous verdict. Even though She-Venom is not a long-running character like She-Hulk is, the story of Anne Wing is rather heartbreaking, and it is interesting how the symbiote reacts when bonded to her. Her fears stopped her from truly accepting the symbiote, which made it difficult for her to deal with the bloodlust of the symbiote, which traumatized her even more. Even though the She-Venom came into existence roughly 4 times, the impact that it left on Anne Wing and the fans is far more than we can explain. A less heartbreaking reimagining of this character would be rather welcomed by our fans, for we would love to see more She-Venom action. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave and like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thank you, everyone.